Shabbat Shalom, everyone. In the moment earlier in our service where we are standing before the open ark, me and Rabbi Bergman make choices every week of which prayer to include. And often recently, we've both been picking the English prayer about peace, shalom. And it opens with these words, which are deceptively simple. It says, Avinu Malkeinu, Master of Peace, help us and strengthen us so that we always strive for peace. Easier said than done. It is easier to talk about peace than to actually make peace. And I imagine that by bringing this up, you are all thinking about peace on a meta level. You're thinking about peace between countries, peace for the Jewish people. But I want to say that the same is actually true for peace interpersonally. It is also hard to strive for peace in our interpersonal interactions. And that's really where I want to focus this morning, because something I see happen all too often is somebody says something or does something, and we assume the worst. We walk around assuming the worst all the time. This is arguably human behavior, and yet religious teaching actually wants us to question that judgment that we make every time we interact with people, and invites us to judge each other favorably. And as I said, this is deceptively simple. It is deceptively simple to say that we should always strive for peace, and that's why it's worthy of a sermon. It's worthy of 10 minutes of your time to think about what it actually looks like to judge someone favorably and to not assume the worst when they say or do what they do. What does this actually look like? Now, on a simple level, it might be that somebody says to you something that strikes you the wrong way, or you feel that feeling in your gut. Oh, God, I hate this person. Just can't stand it every time. That is a moment where it is good to pause, okay? It's good to pause and start to just unravel all of that messy emotion that's coming up for you. Take a deep breath, and then just rewrite the story. Actually, maybe they didn't mean that at all. Maybe you don't even have to imagine why they said what they said, but I'm just going to take the best version possible of what they mean, and I'm going to act that way. I promise you that if you manage to do that, and it's hard, their guard will just melt away. And even if they were actually coming at you with negative emotion, you're going to disarm them in your behaving as if they actually meant well. Okay. This could be called a practice that we actually talk about in Judaism and in Torah called Dan Lechat Zchut, to judge your fellow favorably. We hear it first in Pirkei Avot, and Pirkei Avot is Mishnah. It's the earliest rabbinic teaching that we have. And we're told that Yehoshua ben Prachia would say, make for yourself a Rav and acquire for yourself a friend, and dan et kol ha'adam l'chaf zchut, and judge every person who you meet favorably, i.e. in a positive light. And this is the practice that I'm talking about. The work of actually judging another person favorably means minimizing that negative or fearful emotion that comes up in yourself when you interact with other people. The other place in our Torah where we talk about this actually is something that we read every Shabbat morning. I feel like these verses have so much richness in them, and I've spoken of them many times. So it's on page 110 that we read from the book of Vayikra about the practice of judging fairly. It says, B'tzedek tishpot amitecha. In justice or fairness, you should judge your fellow. And this practice gets connected by the rabbis to judging favorably, Judging justly and judging favorably are not necessarily the same thing. You might think, but they did something wrong. So if I'm going to judge them justly, I should be holding them accountable. But the rabbis make a connection. They say, and this is much later, 13th century, in Sefer HaChinuch, that actually the commandment to judge your fellow man justly also includes in it the commandment to judge your fellow favorably, and only to understand their deeds and their words for the good. This means whatever someone intends, we could make it our work. It is a mitzvah, a commandment to make it our work, to try to understand what they mean for the good. And that might not be the same as whether they are exactly right or wrong, but judging them favorably, giving a little bit of openness to their own potential bad behavior in the way they're interacting with us, that could actually make peace between the two of you. In our parsha this week, we open with some very evocative words. It says that God is putting before us a blessing and a curse. And I want to pay close attention to the way that the Hebrew is written. It says, Et habracha asher tishma'u, this blessing, asher, which really translates to that you will obey. And then it says, V'haklala im lo tishma'u, and you will have a curse, im, if you don't obey. So this difference between asher and im becomes a space for drushing and making sense of what's happening here. The literal translation of our verses that open our parsha would be a blessing that you obey and a curse if you do not obey. And a 19th century commentator, Malbim, who really focuses on semantics, says this comment: a blessing that you obey implies then that the very obedience to the divine commandments constitutes the blessing. I think often we read these verses that say that you will have blessing or curse in the sense of a retributive God. You do something wrong, you're going to get something bad. What's happening here is we're reading the grammar very closely and seeing, wait a second, maybe we're not talking about God making punishment down the line, but that actually the blessing comes through the act. What does that look like? It says, it is not like a case of a master who rewards their servant for loyalty and punishes them for disobedience, where the servant's due becomes dependent on the master's whim and is not inherent in the action itself. Rather, a better parallel is to a doctor who assures their patient that when they will be well, who assures their patient that they will be well as long as they adhere to the regimen that they are prescribed. And otherwise, they're going to suffer. The consequences are here inherent in the deed itself. So when we think about this claim that blessing and curse are our work, I want to connect for you this idea of judging one another favorably with the blessings and the curses, because we actually can feel a very close correlation between our own work of judging one another in a positive light, and in doing so, receiving the blessing of having had built positivity in our communication with our closest people and in communication with the rest of each other and the world. Our ability to judge one another favorably actually shapes our interactions into blessings or curses. So I want to return you to what I said in the beginning. When we say, Master of Peace, bless us with peace, help us and strengthen us so that we always strive for peace, this is what striving for peace looks like. It means giving an inch to somebody else sometimes. It means allowing that maybe they're wrong, but if you can judge them favorably, they might come and meet you halfway. And that is how we engender blessing in our own lives. Shabbat Shalom.